Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are well into our 34th year, I interview writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished, what they're planning for the future. It is slightly, sometimes, a wider net than that. As you know, we have had on recently a sculptor, we have had on in the past musicians, we have had on composers, actors, all sorts of artists. So if you have an idea of someone who might be a good idea for the Writer's Block, writer or other brand of artist, watch for our address at the end of the show. We'd be glad to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block and all the other original programming that comes out of 1623 Studios is a result of cable television. It's a wonderful community product, a great asset all over Cape Ann and to the world, because our shows are loaded up on YouTube, that you get only through cable. Keep with cable, stick with the Writer's Block. Tonight, we do have a writer. His name is Michael Glenn, and he's just come out with a book titled Selected Stories, which he has written over a number of decades and collected in a wonderful anthology that is available now. And we're going to show you his website, and you can get more information on the book and access to the book if you look at that. Welcome to the Writer's Block, Michael.
Thank you, John.
I know you were on again a number of years ago. We were both a little younger.
That's for sure.
It's nice to have you back.
Thank you.
Oh, I want to find out, because our audience might not remember, where you're from originally and where did you go to school?
I'm originally from New York, grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, and I went to college at Princeton, did a year of grad school at Harvard, and then went off to medical school at Columbia, New York.
You jumped from New York City to Atlanta real fast.
Well, my dad went down when I was 4.
So you don't remember New York much?
I don't remember it except when I went to medical school there. So I remember it in the 60s.
Yeah, 60s. Yeah. So how did you get up to Boston? And you live near Boston. You live on the north side.
Yeah, we live in Medford.
Medford.
I came to the Boston area after the Air Force. It was a question of where my first wife and I would go, and I had some fond memories of Cambridge. So we came here 1971 after the Air Force. I got a position at Boston State Hospital, and then things took off there.
I'm glad you found Gloucester, too.
I love Gloucester.
In time to be on the Writer's Block again.
Thank you.
One of the things we talked about before the show started is that I wanted to ask you to read a couple things. And I think since we're in the introduction part of the show, I wonder if you would read a couple of paragraphs from the introduction, which is relevant to your background, and also later, although we don't have time for the whole introduction, the writers that have been an influence on you.
You want the first 2 paragraphs?
First couple ones, if you would.
Writing was my earliest ambition, and it has always been close to my core. As a 3rd grader, I composed stories about Little Tree and his friends in the forest. When my teacher, Miss Lake, invited me to share them with the class, I did, and was delighted when my classmates loved them. Such was my first experience with the joys of writing and the pleasure of being read. From then on, writing remained a constant interest, a leitmotif that impelled me to produce a variety of stories, plays, poems, novels, and nonfiction over the years. Except for a short time during my college and postgraduate years, though, writing was virtually never my main focus. There was always some other, more important duty to pursue. Whether it was medical school, psychiatric training, the Air Force, family life, political organizing, or my medical practice, there was always something else to put first. And yet I continued to write.
Good, thank you very much.
Sure.
You were in the Air Force. Were you an MD already when you were in the Air Force?
I was an MD. I went and I was chief of psychiatry and neurology at a SAC base in North Dakota.
Oh, that's before they took out most of the ICBMs.
Yeah, there were missile silos and lots of bombers. That was 69 to 71.
Yeah, I know the eastern North Dakota is clear of most of the silos, although in Minot there's a huge base with a lot of nukes
Yeah,
and
yeah,
a lot of planes.
yeah, there is. And there was a big hospital.
So you decided not to stay in the Air Force.
I tried actually to leave the Air Force. I filed for conscientious objector status at one point. There's a long story in that, which we'll go into some other time.
Okay.
But the Air Force decided that I was opposed to this war in Vietnam, but not to all war. And they directed me to
Directed you to.
continue as the psychiatrist on base.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you don't regret your decision to leave the Air Force?
I don't.
I have another question, a career question. I think you intimated to me in emails or conversation that you did have a little bit of trouble at one point deciding whether to be a professional writer or continue with medicine. Do I have that right? Or?
It's true. There were actually two turning points in my life when I was quite young. When I was 21, I was in graduate school and I was turning out fiction and plays. And I had a crisis of confidence as to how good I was as a writer. No one had really told me that to be a writer you need to put in an apprenticeship of a good 10 years. I was captive to the romantic genius theory. Either you had it or you didn't.
That comes with youth.
That comes with youth. And when the fiction that I had done was rejected, I thought, well, I'm not exactly sure what to do. A theater director in Atlanta, who had actually produced one of my plays, invited me down to be playwright in residence in Atlanta. He said, you'll learn how to write plays if you're part of a repertory company. But I didn't want to go back to Atlanta, where I had grown up. And so instead I decided to go to medical school. Being a doctor had been my dad's ambition, and he had never fulfilled it.
So there's a fork right there. You went to medicine.
There was a fork, and I went to medicine. There was another fork when I was finishing up medical school. The book that I had been working on wound up, the first 2 chapters wound up being accepted at the Hudson Review. And I suddenly had a publication and an agent who was interested in representing me. And there was a real fork in the road as to whether I should go ahead and continue with my psychiatric training or to let it go and start working on fiction. I pretended to make a decision by saying I would do both. And
ambitious.
Yeah, and what that meant was that the writing got squeezed in because the other work really took a lot over.
And you can't squeeze the most important thing. If something's the most important, it can't be squeezed.
No, it was hard.
Yeah. So, are you now, as a retired person of mature age, happy with your decisions in the past?
I am. I think I made the right decisions, and certainly family along the way came, and friends along the way came. You can't really look back at that.
Yeah. Good. Now, specifically, turning to the book, Selected Stories, which came out in the fall.
Yeah.
In the fall, we're actually going to broadcast the show in the winter. So, in the fall, in early October.
September 28th.
September 28th, Selected Stories. When did you get the idea to collect these stories, which have been written over I think the first one is 59, and the most recent is 17?
2015, 17, yes.
That's a long period. When did you decide to do this?
It's an interesting story to me. I have a friend who spends a lot of time in his attic. He reads his letters, he looks at his photograph, he plays his old records. He's very involved with things from his past. And he and I were talking about a year ago about this habit of his. And I said, I never go in my attic. I've got these 70 boxes. I never go up there.
Never go where?
Into my attic. And he said, go into your attic. So I went up in my attic, and among the things that were there, I found several boxes and folders with many stories. There were about 80 short stories there. And I was curious. I took them all out, and I read through them. And I thought, I put a lot of work into these stories, and some of them were really good. And I thought, I don't want to just leave them there. I would like to share them with people. I would like them to be a kind of legacy. So I chose 20 of the stories that I thought were the best. Some had been published, some were virtually finished, and others needed some work. So I brought them downstairs in a big box. And
The 20.
yeah,
Are there 20 in here? I didn't
I
count.
think they're 19
I
in
didn't
there.
count, actually.
Yeah, I think they're 19. So I brought them downstairs. I started working on them, and I decided that I would put them out.
And that was a year ago
That was early in the winter, February, March
of
this year,
23.
23.
23. So this took approximately 9 months to gestate.
Yeah, 6 to 8
Say.
months
Yeah, 6 to 8
to
months.
pull the thing through and carry it out.
And you're pleased. It's a beautiful book.
It's a nice
It
book.
looks, I mean, it's physically beautiful. And I think you had family members involved in the cover.
It's true. Our son is a graphic designer and has worked as such for 35 years. And I asked him if he would design the cover, and he did. And I think you have a JPEG of the cover.
Well, it jumps out. I mean,
Uh-huh.
You don't want to jump out at the
Yes.
at the bookstores.
Yeah.
And where can our audience find this?
They can order it at Amazon.
Amazon?
Just ask for Michael Glenn Selected Stories. And if they don't like Amazon, they can go to their own bookstore, because it's available to bookstores through a service called Ingram. And you can
Ingram?
go to a bookstore,
Yeah.
just ask them to order it.
Yeah.
And you can get
Okay.
it.
Bookstores. Yeah. Amazon is. Well,
It's there.
that's not the topic for
Right.
today. That's not the topic for the day. The stories. I enjoyed all of them, and especially enjoyed a couple from the beginning, because I lived through that period too. And I love little references to a 25-cent paper, and everybody's smoking and offering cigarettes to everybody else, long before we were aware of any kind of danger.
It's true.
Thank goodness. And then they come up to fairly recent stories. Who were your main influences for the earlier stories in the 50s and 60s? Well, mostly the 60s and 70s.
Mhm.
And could you read a section of one or two of them for us?
You know, I majored in French, and I spent my junior year in France. And when I was in France, that was 57-8, I encountered Ionesco. I've been reading a lot of Beckett. And there was a movement in France at that time called the New Novel. People like Alain Robbe-Grillet and Michel Butor. And it really spoke to me. I was very excited. It was an extremely objectivist, dry, from the outside kind of description. And I started writing like that when I got back.
And you did.
Yeah,
You
I did. In fact, I had a correspondence with Butor for a while.
Really?
Yeah, continued.
I didn't know, or at least maybe I knew and forgot that you were a French major.
Uh-huh.
Your wife, Susan, is also a
Absolutely.
French major. And I no doubt you speak nothing but French at home. Can you choose one of the earlier stories and read us a section that might give a piece, give the audience a sense of the tone, maybe objectivist,
Sure.
something earlier. You mentioned The Room.
Yeah, The Room was the piece that got published in the Hudson Review.
A
When I was in
Hudson
med
Review is a wonderful credit.
Sure.
Uh,
So I can just read the beginning of that.
yeah, a couple paragraphs. Yes, if you would.
Sure. Thank you. The Room. I am sitting at my desk. The window is to my right. Through it, I can see the street and the apartment house across the street. When my shades are up, I can see the top floor of the building, but when they are half down, as they are now, I can only see the bottom 2 stories and half of the third one. I haven't yet met any of the people across the street. I haven't yet been out of my room, not since I entered it, not since I paid the old lady her rent for a month in advance and moved in with my groceries. One large rectangle of glass forms the lower half of the window, but the upper half, the half covered by the torn yellow shade, is composed of 6 smaller rectangles of dirty glass. There is a crack in the very top frame to the right, but since the shades are halfway down, I can't see the crack now, and it is just as good that way. I'm sure I would feel a draft on my neck from the crack if I could see it, but now that I cannot see it, I am sure that there is no draft in the room. It is cold. It is almost December. When I came here with my groceries, the landlady made a joke about Thanksgiving, and I laughed. but I had no turkey. I don't celebrate holidays. Every day is like the one before it to me. But that is beside the point. What matters is that it is cold. Perhaps there is no heat. If the old landlady thinks I shall put up with no heat during the coldest months of the year, she is wrong. When I see her, I shall speak to her. I shall tell her that it is cold in my room. I shall not laugh at her jokes unless she promises to warm my room. I must make a note of that. But of course, she will probably say that the heat is already on and that there must be a crack in one of my windows, causing my room to be cold. What will I say to her then? What could I answer without affirming that indeed there is a crack in the uppermost right pane of the window, the one which is covered by the shades now? I had best not mention it at all. If I ask her to fix the window, she will become angry. She will stalk about my room, waving her arms. I do not want that. I shall say nothing to her then. I shall pretend I do not see her if she comes. I shall lock the door. But all this is beside the point. I was talking about the room.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I love that staccato, factual, almost catalog of facts. When you get yourself into the head of a narrator whose name is not revealed in the short story, I don't think you ever said the name. You get your head into a character and narrator. Is that difficult, or is it more easily done because of your psychiatry, or at that time your leanings towards psychiatry?
I'm not really sure that psychiatry has much to do with it. I think all of us have different voices in our heads. My daughter is into internal family systems therapy, which talks about different parts of the individual. And in a way, there are different parts that we all carry. And I've got some particularly obsessional voices in my head. I can certainly get into them and let them run. I can find that voice and just let it run and see what it has to say. And many times when I write in the first person, that's what it is. I kind of find a voice like a horse and just ride it.
It's very much like that actresses describe the same kind of function before getting ready of a part. Find that character.
That's right.
In you, because we are all everybody.
That's right.
In a real sense. Some of the people who narrate these stories are on the edge.
Absolutely.
Let's say on the maybe over the edge.
Absolutely.
Does that draw on your work as a psychiatrist and patient history?
It helps me understand the lengths and limits where things can go. It's interesting, being a psychiatrist, you're of course privy to a lot of stories. Being a physician, you're privy to a lot of stories. And I was always amazed at the therapists like Irving Yalom and others who would publish these books and tell patient stories. Because I always thought you couldn't do that, not unless you got releases for them. So there are many stories, I think, that are bouncing around in my head. I once had an idea of writing a book called Stories That Cannot Be Told, but I decided not to do that.
You could do a so-called Romana Clef and just change the name.
Well, I didn't
hope
want
nobody
to do that.
Figures it out.
Didn't want to do that. It was more invented stories. Yeah.
The early stories, and you just read an example from The Room, in early stories. What's the next stage in your development when you started writing in the 70s and 80s?
Well, it's interesting. Over a lifetime, we pursue different voices and different interests. After I came back from the Air Force, I got involved in organizing politics. The Vietnam War was going on. I think it affected everybody in our generation, certainly every guy. And I was opposed to the war. So I got involved in some political organizing. Sue and I spent a number of years working in communities and factories. And that shaped some of my interest in writing as well. I worked on stories from a working class perspective. Told one story that had come to me while I was on the Indian reservation. As part of my Air Force duty, I spent some time at one of the reservations in North Dakota. So I wrote one story about Native American couple. And I wrote a number of stories about folks living in working class areas. I wrote a story about a worker at General Motors where I worked named Barney, and a story about a young kid whose family moved from Cambridge to Dorchester. Those stories were actually published in 1978 as a collection called Trouble on the Hill. So those were more working class stories. Later on, I was reading a lot of Raymond Carver, and the obsessional style got pared down. It was still obsessional, but it was more compact. So there were a number of stories that were written in that style. And then as I got older, the stories just became more reflective, and they kind of evolved their own style, like Davidoff, which is about a family physician who sees the obituary of one of the psychiatrists who taught him psychiatry in medical school, and has a flash to events that happened in his life around that person who's dead. And then the last story, of course, which covers a long period of time in the life of a French teacher.
Can you read us a portion of one of the stories that exemplifies your dealing with working class characters?
Sure. I can just read you the beginning of one of those. Yeah, this is about the family that moves from Cambridge to Dorchester, and it's told really from the viewpoint of a young boy, called Making Friends. Andy hadn't wanted to move. All his friends were in the old neighborhood, but Ma said they had to because she wasn't going to be beat up again by that crazy Warren who had already attacked her twice. The week before, he'd broken the door down to get at her. He was out of his mind, strung out on drugs or something, and he'd gotten in his mind that Ma was his woman just because she'd been nice to him once or twice. And then, because she wouldn't go along with it, he tried to teach her a lesson. So Ma said they all had to move, and no one could know about it. Annie helped them find a place, and one night after dark, they moved everything as quick as they could, with Annie and her husband and another friend to help, and left their old apartment empty, with the doors open and the keys in the lock, and the floors all littered with garbage and broken toys. They didn't leave a forwarding address, and they didn't tell anyone where they'd gone. Andy begged to go back just once and explain to his friends where he'd gone and why, but Ma said no. She didn't want anyone knowing, or else Warren would be breaking down their door again.
Thank you. I like those stories, as you say, they're about the working class people, because the country's gotten too wealthy. I think. And some critics say we're in decay, and I don't object. But the writer's block is doing a good job. I want to make sure I ask you a couple technical questions because we're getting short on time.
Sure.
What advice would you give to writers who are either starting out and young, or like yourself, adults thinking they might go back and retrieve stories? What advice would you give them?
Well, it's different. People who are starting out, I would give them the advice I never heard, which is that you need to write for a decade. Work hard, write every day, be in a writing group, take criticism to heart, and perfect your craft, and don't give up. That's what I would tell a young writer. An older writer, I would say follow experiences which give you an intense feeling and write about that. You know, there was a lot of stuff in writing school that goes on which says, well, imagine that Einstein was talking to Copernicus. What would that conversation? Imagine that a delivery man was talking to a new immigrant. What would that be like? And I think, yeah, those are interesting exercises. But to me, the question of writing has always been, is there a feeling that I've experienced that keys me in to a story that kind of opens an entire door? The story called Piano Lesson is like that. There was a moment in my life that something like that happened, and the feeling was so intense, I needed to create a story around it, to explain it.
Tell us about Piano Lesson.
Piano Lesson is a story about a 14-year-old boy who's been taking piano for maybe 8 years, and he idealizes his piano teacher and the piano teacher's wife. And then one day an experience happens which shatters that idealization. And in fact, it makes him leave piano lessons forever.
Quite a lesson.
Yeah.
We have it's the second last story, 237. Can you read the first paragraph of that? Just we're almost at the end of our time,
Oh, the
sadly.
piano lesson, yeah. Music was a sacrament in our family. My mother, who'd grown up poor, received violin lessons from a neighbor when she was 16, and she never forgot the magical experience of drawing the bow over the strings. Although she never continued, the neighbor died. He held on to that violin for the rest of her life. When I grew up, it was mounted on the wall over the record cabinet in our living room, a mute testament to its place in her heart. She taught me the piano when I was 5, using John Thompson's Teaching Little Fingers to Play, and then it goes on.
Thank you. Thank you. A quick last question. Do you write every day for a set time if you're in a writing period of your life? Or do you write when you can grab a few minutes?
I think the most successful is to write every day at the same time, usually early in the day. Find a time, 2 hours, 3 hours, and do that.
I talked to a friend of mine years ago, novelist Tim O'Brien. I asked him what the most important part of writing is. He said, putting in butt time.
That's right.
That's a straight answer, and I think I agree. You can't work when you're inspired.
No.
You have to work to get inspired.
No, that's the whole point, is doing the work.
Michael Glenn, I want to thank you very much for being on the Writer's Block and sharing your background and the background behind selected stories. The book is available on Amazon, and you can order it at any local bookstore. Michael Glenn, and we have shown the website during the show. So thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you, John, for having me. It's been a nice talk.
I want to thank all our TV audience, too, for being with us again on another episode. If you've learned something about the short story craft from Michael Glenn and the history of his stories over a number of years, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks for being with us, and I hope to see you again next time on the Writer's Block. Good night.